What's up guys, James here, and welcome back to part 2 of my commentary on the debate, Is Feminism Sexist? With Tom Martin arguing for and Estelle Hart arguing against. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, then please pause the video now and check out the link below. So just a few things before I get started with part 2 properly then. So obviously I'm quite heavily on Tom's side, but I did have a few disagreements with him, the main one being that his figures for false rape statistics do seem a lot higher than the evidence actually suggests at the moment. As for Estelle, among other things, she's expressed the views that that when men are violent it's because they're men, but when women are violent it's because they're just retaliating against violent men, and when lesbians are violent it's because the violent one has internalised a male role. She's also exaggerated all the data which shows women to be victims, exaggerated data to show men to be a lot more rapey than they actually are, and she's either ignored or smeared all data which shows men to be victims. And remember, this is the person that the UCL has chosen to argue that feminism isn't sexist. And now she's also a social constructionist, as you'd expect. So she basically has the view that gender is a social construct, biology has nothing to do with how traditional gender roles were formed historically, but somehow, by magic it seems, women, despite making the majority of society, have let themselves be oppressed across all cultures and across all times in history, and that just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, on to part 2.
That's why so many people here will undoubtedly give different definitions of saying what are the feminists. I think myself and Tom actually probably good prime examples of this, whatever we get into that. But that's why feminism is important, and that's why I think we need to talk about feminism.
So what Estelle's talking about here is Tom calling himself a feminist, which he did near the end of my previous video. Now, I agree that feminism is a very wide ideology. At the extreme end, you've got the lesbian separatists, who, most of them, genuinely do hate all men with a burning passion. And on the moderate side, you've got the sex positives, which for the most part I support, and I also think there's equally strong reasons from the men's rights perspective to support most of their goals as well. Now, feminism has femme in it, so I think at a bare minimum you have to really believe that women are more affected negatively by gender issues than men. With feminine, if you believe in equality and you do have a very neutral stance, surely you shouldn't be calling yourself a feminist. But I mean, that's just my perspective, that just seems a bit silly to me, but Tom is free to label himself however he wants, and I'm more concerned with the views someone actually holds rather than the label they ascribe to their belief set.
Okay, so I'm slightly disappointed by the proposition, because what I haven't been convinced about is how feminism causes these violence and crimes against men. Like, I've heard a lot that men are abused, and there are lots of issues that are pertinent to men's rights. But what I haven't actually heard is why feminism is the direct cause of these things. Like, to say, for example, if a woman reads a feminist book and then assaults her husband, I mean, that's the sort of thing, to say that blames feminism, that's the sort of argument people make when, some nutter kills kills anyone because they read Catching the Ride or whatever.
Okay, the debate isn't how has feminism caused men's problems. The question of the debate is feminism sexist? And my argument for academic feminism being sexist is that it claims a self-appointed monopoly on equality whilst ignoring half the issue, exaggerating data in support of their position, making men appear far worse than they actually are, and opposing groups which actually deal with the other side, sometimes violently. This is sexist.
So that's basically what I'm asking here, like, why why has feminism directly led to these things? And I feel like, you know, the feminism side may have like cited statistics supporting how there's a pay gap in women's rights, which is also, by the way, supported by the National Office of Statistics and the Chartered Management Institute. So I get it.
Okay, if the National Office of Statistics did say what you thought it did, then you'd have answered your own question, because academic feminism does have an influence over private and public policies, and in that way it can negatively affect men if the data they're putting out there is flawed and makes men look overly violent and women to look like bigger victims than they actually are. You've also got things like women receiving far more money for health concerns. Female cancers get drastically more funding than male cancers, and domestic violence shelters certainly put orders of magnitude more money towards helping women than they do men, and feminism has had an influence over this. But let's have a look at what the National Office of Statistics actually says, you know? Look at evidence, why I'm crazy like that. So, when you're comparing the overall difference in men's and women's pay, the difference is 20.2%. Shocking, isn't it? But when you look at just full-time men and women's pay, you realise that that gap drops to 10.5%. Normalising for some other factors, 22% of the gap is due to different industries and occupations in which women work. 21% is due to differences in years of full-time work. 16% of the gap is due to negative effect of wages of having previously worked part-time or having taken time out of the labour market to look after a family. 5% of the gap is due to formal education levels. Now it says there's a significant proportion, 36%, which couldn't be explained by any of these factors, suggesting discrimination may be an important factor. Now 36% of 10.5% is 3.78%, so women get paid 96% of what men do in full-time pay when you've normalised for those factors, which is certainly a massive difference from what the feminists are claiming. Also, it says discrimination may be an important factor. It doesn't say that it is. Saying that discrimination is a cause is a positive claim which you need to prove. You don't just assert that any difference you see is due to discrimination, because that is dishonest. There's certainly other factors which could be normalised for, and you might even find that when you normalise for other factors as well, women actually end up being paid more than men, potentially. And there's a few things to back this up. Follow-up from that particular article says that women in part-time work are actually paid more than part-time men, and I've seen other research showing that women under 29 are actually earning more than men. So what's actually been said by those people doesn't match what you think it does.
Yeah, there's no like statistical battle here, but I mean it's really just even if feminists just focus on women's issues, that doesn't implicitly imply that they also don't care about men's issues, or that they think, you know, hitting men is okay, or that they think killing men is okay in any way. Yeah, when a feminist decides to focus on women's issues, I don't think it's mutually exclusive with men's issues either. So I guess like when we talk about these issues about how women are violent against men, and you know that there are false rape allegations, I don't see how feminism has caused that.
If feminists just focused on female issues and let us just focus on male issues, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. But if they're putting out faulty information which influences the way people think and act, then yeah, that is going to contribute to the problems which men face, especially when they oppose the formation of male groups.
You wholly explained before that violence by women is a response to violent men. But how do you explain the high rates of violence in lesbian relationships?
Yes.
I didn't say not. I didn't say only discrimination wasn't associated with men about class. That, for me, that's all that would be lost next year. And paternity, I think, is when we could have a, again, a separate debate on men do have rights to their children, and actually, the legal precedent is to attempt to split kind of rights between what it is. That's what's written in the law. We can have, for them, I think there are cool examples both ways. But I think that's more of a problem where...
the majority of mothers have...
These not actually, well, yeah, do you think that's not the case? I mean, there are various things around what happens, and I actually think this is again a sort of gender where people believe that mothers should do more for childcare. So often in very acrimonious separations, men tend to move out of the marital or family home, because they believe that it's better to be stable, and that's, in a variety of things. And again, I believe that's just what people believe a natural gender roles, try and get reject. So the second part of sex-based violence, I said that's often a reason. I mean, I don't think I'm going to sort of sit down and go through every single case. I'm not aware of that statistic around violence in lesbian relationships.
Well, there's a charity called the Broken Rainbow, which specialises in domestic violence.
But there's also a lot of violence in same-sex relationships, because often in same-sex relationships people are encouraged to take on gender roles. I'm sure many from the room have heard this idea of sort of people go, well, who's the guy, who's the girl? People say this to gay fans, mindful people or something like that. No, this is certainly not something I agree with, but this is certainly something that happens. We're really encouraged to take on those roles. And actually, sexism against women, obviously speaking to women, because we live in a society where we're conditioned to think negatively about ourselves. Because actually, when you've got a society that says one part of the population somehow less worthy, someone should be objectified, etc., of course that will influence everyone, not just men, influence women as well.
So there we have it. Even in a situation where no men are present, as far away from a male situation as it's possible to be, a lesbian relationship, somehow the violence in that is still caused by maleness. You see why we think that your brand of feminism is sexist now? I know I made a mistake at the beginning of the video. I thought you mentioned this in the previous part, but I can't be bothered to edit that out. So, yeah. Male on female violence, patriarchy. Female on male violence, patriarchy. Female on female violence, also patriarchy. What the fuck?
Okay, as a man, I'd like to distance myself from some of the other speakers. I hope you get laid, mate. Take the red pill. I'm sorry, even that in itself is quite offensive, I think.
I think that using words like white knight and mangina and saying that male feminists are just doing it to get laid, those sort of tactics do seem to be overused in the MRM, and of course one of the problems with this is that if we do that, then we don't hold the moral high ground when feminists say that female MRAs are just doing it to get male attention. That being said, though, there are times when I think it's appropriate. People wouldn't be sarcastically shouting "I hope you get laid" at that guy if he simply just presented a feminist argument. But it really did look like he was trying to get female approval when he's saying, "I'm going to separate myself from these other men. I'm not one of the bad guys, I'm one of the good guys."
You talk about demonising of men in the feminist debate. I personally can only talk for myself, but I've never had any personal experience of being discriminated against on the fact that I'm a man. And I question whether any man in here has had that experience themselves.
All I can say here is that if you haven't faced any form of discrimination based on being male, you must have led a very, very sheltered life.
And I think everyone here will know that there's a long history of repression of women.
Oppression, not repression, not suppression, oppression.
And no one can deny that. I'm sorry, a woman could be raped by her husband until 1991. That was changed in law in 1991, and before that, if the man wanted to have sex with his wife, the wife couldn't say anything. And I think that in itself is obscene.
Yes, historically, women did have it very bad in some ways. Men also had it bad in other ways. Men had it very good in some ways. Women had it very good in other ways. It's your side of a debate here which fails to realise that it's not a one-sided issue. I'll be talking more about the marital rape law a little bit later, but you happen to go back 21 years for an example of female oppression. The whole point of this thing is not women's history or feminist history. It's about what's going on today. So, I mean, going back 21 years, I mean, that's really quite telling of the strength of your side's position here. I mean, that's probably even before you were born.
The gentleman over there mentioned about paternity rights, and it's the man that has no rights. It's actually the primary caregiver has priority in the custody of the child, and yes, there is a fact that women are generally the primary caregivers, but that doesn't mean that it's the woman's right against the man's right.
But it is one parent's right against the other parent's right. I mean, as far as I see it, where it's possible, unless one of the parents has done something really provably horrific, then they should be getting equal custody. Now, yes, unfortunately, men are discriminated against in this regard. When it comes to child support, even if you do normalise for the fact that a lot more women have sole custody than men, women still pay considerably less child support than men do.
And that's my main point, I think, is that I think there are extremist feminists, I'm sure, and I think there are an extremist anti-feminists on the other side, and they distort this debate to make it about sex, when actually, like the lady over there said, it's about gender equality.
You may genuinely believe that feminism is about equality because that's what you've been told constantly, but that's about as accurate as Christians believing that Christianity is about love when they have more blood on their hands than any other group. I'll say this again because if I keep repeating it, maybe one day you'll understand. This stands for feminism in general, but especially academic feminism. Feminism claims a self-appointed monopoly on equality whilst ignoring one half of the issue, exaggerating data in support of their position, making men appear far worse than they actually are, and they oppose groups which actually deal with the other side, sometimes violently. This isn't about equality, this is sexism.
And I think there's been a lot of sexist rhetoric belittling feminism and generalising that all feminists are man-haters, when actually, through history, the only way that you can change any inequality is by having people pushing in the opposite direction.
Perhaps it was a poor choice of words on your part, or maybe you just don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Let's go over what you've actually said. So, there's been a lot of sexist rhetoric belittling feminism, calling all feminists man-haters. No, that's not sexist. That is calling an ideology man-hating. Feminism is not synonymous with women. There's female feminists, most feminists are female. There's also male feminists. Maybe you hadn't noticed, but you kind of appear to be one yourself, so maybe I'd have thought you'd have been aware of that. And then what you do after that statement, you don't counter the claim that feminists are man-haters. You say, but historically the only way you can change an inequality is by pushing back in the other direction. So you don't challenge that feminists are man-haters, you justify that by saying that it's necessary. And by your logic, that's just, fight fire with fire. There's loads of gay guys who are beaten up just because they're gay. So what they should be doing, right, is they should just be beating up straight people instead.
I just wanted to respond to a few misconceptions or misrepresentations, whichever way you want to look at it. The fact that somebody says that rape is a serious issue does not mean that they think men should be put in prison for rapes they did not commit. I think that's an atrocious thing to happen. I think it shouldn't happen. That doesn't mean that rape is not an issue. The two are not mutually exclusive, and I think it's very unhelpful to present it that way.
We're not saying rape isn't a serious crime. We're agreeing with you. Your side is the one which doesn't hold your opinion. The men's rights position, every single MRA I've ever spoken to agrees with this. Rape is a serious crime. False rape allegations are a serious crime. They're different crimes. They're both important. It's your side which is saying that, we shouldn't put any attention towards false rape allegations, because if we do that, then that takes attention away from real rape.
Similarly, with a lot of things that have been said, Tiger Woods was brought up. I don't speak for everyone, but as a feminist, I think that anyone of whatever gender doing whatever they want to do outside their marriage is equally should be criticised. I think the reason Tiger Woods was criticised was because he's the famous one. I think maybe we should use our common sense a little bit here.
I hate to say this, but I actually agree.
I think also Tom mentioned a couple of things about women not being considered accountable for their crimes when their husband's present. I don't like that. I want to be considered accountable for my own actions, whether a man's there or not. I consider that sexism too. I think bringing these things out as if they make our arguments invalid is completely ridiculous. We agree with you. Also, I don't want a man to pay for all my food. I'm capable of doing that for myself, thank you.
So yeah, I'm agreeing with the vast majority of what she said there. She sounds quite smart, she sounds quite egalitarian. Maybe there's even hope for her yet, and she'll realise the flaws with academic feminism. Now, when we're saying that in the past men were held accountable for the crimes that a woman committed, that is something which harms both sexes. The woman isn't shown agency, which means that she's not going to be shown respect and responsibility, etc., so she probably won't ever achieve a position of high power. But I think that that's more sexist. I think that it's more sexist towards the man. The man is then being held responsible for a crime which another person committed. Now, we're not saying that that's an argument against your entire position. It is an argument against the position which your side quite often pushes, that women are the sole bearers of gender-based oppression.
Okay, going back to the guy up there who got a good round of applause. If I could read my own handwriting. Yes, wives were legally allowed to be raped up until 1991. I guess husbands were as well. I'd have to look into that one. But it's just...
Rape is a penetration of the penis.
Women can rape a man. There is the legal principle recognising of involuntary erection, as with women. Just because a woman is lubricated doesn't mean you can rape her, does it? Does it?
No.
This is the most disgusting thing I've heard so far during this debate. Even after they were shown to be wrong, they still continue to smirk at the idea of a woman raping a man. Of course they didn't know that a woman can rape. Society as a whole doesn't give a fuck. Even when the victim's a 14-year-old boy and the perpetrator is his teacher, society considers him lucky. And what is your brand of oh-so-equality feminism doing about this? Fuck all. They're telling you it doesn't happen because portraying men as rapists and only men as rapists is the cornerstone of your ideology. As Tom said, a penis can become erect involuntarily, And a penis isn't exactly invincible. It can be easily injured, even when it's not rape. Now, women can also penetrate a man with the fingers as well. There was a case on the Young Turks fairly recently about that, where the woman drugged the guy, fingered him till he bled, and Kenk, the guy who was doing the news thing, considered the guy lucky and found it funny. Now, it seems that it's making the news a lot more often now, and perhaps men are finally waking up to the idea that this is just not acceptable. In 1993, the UN adopted the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Not the elimination of violence, the elimination of violence against women. Under Section 2A of this made marital rape and genital mutilation a human rights violation. Not for men though. According to the UN, this is perfectly acceptable. And your rights are the ones which are being oppressed? And if you don't give a fuck about that, perhaps you'd care that a female friend of mine refuses to call herself a feminist because she was raped by a female feminist and doesn't think feminists will take her seriously.
Okay, good. Primary caregiver is an interesting one, and I'm glad you brought it up. And that is a valid argument to say it's not sexist, but let's get pragmatic about it. The National Organization of Women in the US, the largest women's group, did have a policy of the principle of shared parenting after divorce, but then they changed it. They voted it down in 1982 to a principle of the primary caregiver getting sole custody. And so in effect, feminism stopped being about equality around about 1982 for that professional organization, because they said, well, it's not very popular with our members because our members want to maternal gatekeep, and so we're going to pander to that. And so I'm asking you to look honestly at the parenting laws as feminists and say men deserve a bit more of the privilege of looking after children and also the work involved as well. And just to touch briefly on the university degree that I'm pursuing, I was doing a master's in gender and they didn't mention the father's rights movement at all.
I'm massively keen to sort of go back to the form. I didn't want to come back. So I did the gender masters for 6 weeks.
Yes.
I think that's just, you cannot, I think, comment fairly on that masters, which actually is very much, looking at the programme, a masters on gender. It's not a women's studies course. It is a masters on gender. It discusses gender, the impacts of gender, and to say, there was no mention of this when you only did it for 6 weeks, I think is actually both fair and fair.
I haven't taken the course myself, but I did find a promotional video. Video is about 5 minutes long. Dr. Tassila Ratner of the Gender Society and Representation, she seems to be the one in charge there. She's a self-described devout feminist. She said gender studies is not only about feminism, implying that a large part of it is. 2 people in the video describe themselves as coming from the women's sector. There's also a close-up of one of their tattoos saying feminist. So there certainly does seem to be a very large feminist bias there. And they managed to mention feminism about 6 times throughout the course of a 5-minute video, but over the course of 6 weeks they can't even bring up the father's rights movement once. Yeah, that does seem like they have a bit of a bias there to me, just saying.
Thank you. I was interested that someone raised the issue of female underrepresentation in Parliament. As people may know, in 2008, Harriet Harman introduced legislation permitting parties to use all women prospective parliamentary candidate shortlists for the coming 5 general elections, or 25 years. There was no mention of this possibility in the 2005 Labour Party manifesto, although they did promise the British people a referendum on Europe. Now, both of the main parties have used all women shortlists for the last election, but the implication of all women shortlists is that the least competent female candidate in the country is automatically preferred over the most competent male candidate. And I wonder, do feminists consider that a price worth paying to get more women into Parliament?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to say I'll take notes.
Firstly, what you said about in America in 1982, the women's organisations voting for, custody of a child to go to the primary caregiver, that's not ending equality, because the primary caregiver doesn't have to be a woman. That's just like a sexist stereotype. And also, going back a bit, what you said about trivialising rape, and that when you make allegations about false rape, you said that's not trivialising rape, but surely by claiming that so many rapes are false, that is in some way trivialising the issue by suggesting that women just make erroneous claims against men.
If Blondie from earlier is watching this video, I told you that it was your side which was ignoring part of the problem, not ours.
But that's trivialising. Anybody who has actually been raped, anyone who has surely...
This is man-hating.
It's not man-hating, I'm just saying anyone who has surely been a victim of sexual assault will feel put off reporting it if, people are saying that, oh well, half of rapes are, just made up by the supposed victims. So how are you meant to get up the confidence to go and report that and take action against your assault, the person who's assaulted you, when there is, this atmosphere of people saying that so many sexual assault, No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, it is in some way trivialising the issue for those who have actually experienced it.
No, you fucking idiot. False rape and rape are two completely different crimes. We can work towards ending both of those at the same time. That's the position of me, Tom, and every other MRA I know. Now, at the moment, we do take rape seriously towards women. If a man's convicted, he'll get years in prison. If a woman makes a false rape allegation against a man, even if it's provably false, if she gets any punishment at all, it's a slap on the wrist. She'll get an £80 fine for wasting police time or something along those lines. And that needs to change. Even if a man isn't convicted of rape, the trauma of being charged, of being arrested and going through that process, knowing that there's people who won't believe him, knowing that there might be people who are after him, who believe the woman's side of the story, those have severe traumatic effects on a guy.
I was going to, I'll quickly respond to this guy, and saying the point, all women's shortlists are better because they're made to counteract a more diffuse discrimination throughout society, and it doesn't matter if the worst woman is automatically preferred because you get the best one of that group, and that in turn leads to a more representational democracy across the whole of society.
Yes, but the worst female candidate is still preferred over the best male. Supposing all of the female candidates except for the very worst one were assassinated. No matter how incompetent she is, she'd still be preferred over the very best male. I know that's an extremely unlikely event, and I know what you're saying. So, supposing there was 50% of the applicants being female and 50% of the applicants being male. If you exclude all of the men, then you've only got a 50% chance that you end up employing the best one. In reality, there's a hell of a lot more men going for the position than women, so you'd actually end up with far less than 50% chance of having the best one. We're not playing a game here, we're talking about employing someone whose decisions affect the lives of tens of thousands of people, and to do this would just be completely irresponsible. And you don't fight sexism with more sexism. That's completely ridiculous. There's also many female politicians, such as Nadine Dorries and Anne Widdecombe, who find it extremely patronising that they're given special treatment just by the fact that they're female. They want to be treated as individuals, as human beings and be treated according to their own merit. So giving special treatment isn't going to reduce sexism. It's going to exacerbate it by causing resentment among the men who are turned down. It's also a strong possibility that Blair was trying to use the women-only shortlists in order to keep certain men out of power who may pose as competition for him. The main reason for the differences in representation are differences in life choices between men and women. This has been fairly well researched as well. Women tend to make career choices based more around flexibility than men, and men tend to make career choices more based on income than women. So that explains a large part of the gap. If you want a more even representation whilst having a true equality, you need to be working from the ground up, not the top down.
I just feel that many men in the crowd missed the point tonight in all this kind of rubbish discussion about bad stats. I mean, yes, there are still issues around violence and other crimes in men, and there are still huge issues with class in society. But the things that tonight really expose many of the values which many men still hold in society, and which I feel that the feminist movement seeks to challenge and make men and women think about. The fact remains that many women and men feel there are still huge problems in society in the way women are portrayed, and with gender equality, and this ends up affecting women more negatively. I mean, that's probably why this kind of men's right movement is so small and fringe. I think that most men would agree with me on that women are negatively affected by gender inequalities more. So I really just want to say, stop picking stats based on things you already believe. Stop dismissing the concerns of people who still, even in 2012, feel society has a real problem and a real kind of negative impact to them.
This is an appeal to popularity. How we feel and what most people believe isn't important. We're talking about the real world here, kid. I've also heard feminists make the opposite claim, that feminism is needed because people don't take feminism seriously. I've seen this so often I had to invent a new type of logical fallacy, which I'm calling the appeal to conspiracy. And, of course, you can't have it both ways, that's kind of obvious. And as I've shown, it's your side which is dismissing concerns, not ours.
I just wanted to come back to this helpful guy over here. I know it took a while ago, but he was talking about homelessness, and I think I just want to say that I think everyone thinks that homelessness is bad, and I don't think you can say that money isn't put into homelessness. Homelessness shouldn't be based on gender, obviously.
Yeah,
and the money. I don't want to interrupt me, please. And I just think you're blaming feminists for there being homeless people, which doesn't really make sense to me.
Now, Tom hasn't said that he's blamed feminists for homelessness. He's just said that it is a gendered issue. And it shouldn't be a gendered issue, but it is. And funnily enough, you feminists who want a monopoly on equality are completely silent about this gendered issue. Funny that.
Yeah, I'd like to direct this if I can. Earlier on, Tom, you said that there is no sex ed industry in the UK. You stated that as if it was fact. Just want to know how you know that. Have you looked in everyone's basements? Because, Fritzl wasn't caught for about 25 years.
I've been quite disgusted by both sides cutting each other off. But I do think that you haven't really represented your argument as well as it should be. I think, first off, maybe the face pulling and gesturing should probably go, particularly before court, perhaps. And secondly, I totally agree that both arguments have been guilty of twisting statistics, but the way they've done it, both parties, this debate has really descended into a man v woman. And, well, I believe it has, unfortunately, and I expected a much more refined debate, and I hope that there will be a more refined debate in court. I'd just like to point out I watched your YouTube video and you used a statistic about the number of rape convictions in India and the ones that you believe to actually, the ones that were actually believed to be genuine, but 2% of them?
Domestic violence.
Sorry, domestic violence. And whilst that may be a valid statistic, exactly, you don't cite it, and sorry, you're not looking at the wider range of who's making those judgments. Were they women jurors who are making those judgments? Were those judgments actually fair? You're not alluding to the patriarchy that Estelle has been, and I think we're missing this middle ground that this debate deserved, and we didn't get tonight.
I agree the face-pulling and stuff was pretty immature. However, Estelle, not particularly that much better. Her doing the personal attack against Tom earlier, being like, you're the one playing the victim now, all that fucking crap. And I gather from actually speaking to Tom that he was supposed to have 20 minutes to talk during the beginning of the debate, but last minute it was dropped to 10, which threw him off quite a bit, understandably. So from the get-go, this debate was heavily stacked on the feminist side's favour.
You're going to get a 5-minute speech each after the last speech. So, is it you and two? Yeah.
The really frustrating thing about this debate is that buried somewhere in the barrage of irrelevance that was the proposition speech is a really valid point about gender identities and us falsely ascribing social roles in terms of gender. And I think the gender problems you identify as caused by feminism are symptoms of the patriarchy and symptoms of exactly the problems that feminism is trying to fight against, such as, for instance, I mean, the Fathers for Justice kind of thing. It always comes up, perennial favourite of people who sort of propagate this kind of myth of structural misandry. But actually, the reason that, I don't think women should be perceived as automatically the primary caregiver, but women are perceived as the automatic primary caregiver because of this, because of the patriarchal intellectual heritage that says that because you are female, you must be automatically more caring and can be forced into a domestic role. The patriarchy restricts our imaginations as to what both sexes can do, and that's a point that I think has been missed by the proposition.
Firstly, it's pronounced
patriarchy.
And let's have a look at the definition there. So the first one was a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descendant is traced through the male line. Now, how can the descendants be traced through the male line when males are primarily being the ones which are being removed from the family? Now, let's have a look at another definition.
Matriarchy.
Matriarchy, a form of social organisation in which descendant and relationships are reckoned through the female line. Now, I'm not saying we live in a matriarchy, but in this case, the observation is the exact opposite of what patriarchy theory, hypothesis, would predict. Men oppressed, patriarchy. Women oppressed, patriarchy. Male privilege, patriarchy. Female privilege, patriarchy. Patriarchy is unfalsifiable, it's not scientific, and there's no reason for a rational person to take it seriously.
Yeah, I will apologise to you, mate, but the reason I shouted out was because a load of people here, whenever the guys were speaking, like booing and hissing, and the standard debate was dropping, so I just joined in, okay? But I was a bit disappointed with all the kind of mugging and all that kind of stuff. It's supposed to be a debate, it's supposed to listen to other people, so that's why I joined in on that. It's a bit of a tit for tat. I think the important thing is that in terms of a lot of the women here have been saying, oh yeah, well, we do understand that there are problems with men, we do understand male issues, feminism is not just about women. I've never heard that. If you can actually take that forward from this meeting today and include the 5% of men who are beaten up, or the 20% of men, whatever it is, in your studies and in your thoughts, that would be absolutely fantastic. I think there's two very important things that I want to summarise on. I do disagree with this thing about sex slaves and that. You can become a sex slave if you're addicted to heroin, and that is wrong, and people need help for that. It's not just a question of coercion. There's all sorts of reasons for that, and we all need to reach out to the people who are in prostitution, and the 100,000 men who apparently are raped in the American prisons, which is by Human Rights Watch. It's called No Escape. It's because we need to reach out to everybody. I think the final thing is that both sides, in terms of sort of this thing about rape and sexual assault, you get this kind of witch hunting mentality where he must be guilty. And you get one of the guys saying, well, he's not guilty at all. And what we all need to do as students or long-term students of life is to look at due process, burden of evidence, fair play, and a fair hearing.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back first on the female student who just spoke and ask, what men's rights movement literature have you read?
I've not really read feminist or men's rights literature, so I'm coming here as a neutral student, really.
Okay, thank you very much. So you haven't read the literature, and I ask all students to look at men's rights literature. If you haven't read it, you probably aren't as well informed as those who have. The next, so I'm briefly going to whiz through this because Estelle did say that men's issues exist, so that's great. I'm going to quickly mention a few. We're talking about paternity leave and pay. Fathers are entitled to 26 times less than mothers. Paternity forward. 30% of non-custodial fathers paying child support are not the father. 1 contraceptive for method for men, 10 for women. No compulsory paternity testing for every newborn, and no debate about it either. Parental alienation, usually mothers training the children to hate their father. Child custody, only 8% of divorced fathers live with their children. The glass cellar, 95% of workplace fatalities are of males. Male wage slavery, 60% of men work more than 60 hours a week in the UK. Gold digging, aka hypergamy. When will professional feminists renounce prostitution in all its forms?
I disagree with Tom about prostitution. As far as I see it, person A wants money more than they want to withhold sex, and person B wants sex more than they want the money. There's a mutually beneficial transaction they can perform there, and it should be up to them how they consensually use their money and their bodies. Now, when it comes to people who expect someone to buy them dinner, drinks, give them flowers, etc. before having sex, that's prostitution. Just less honest and more complicated. Again, I don't have a problem with prostitution, but just call it what it is. The problem is that society encourages women to be prostitutes and guys to be customers. I believe it's about 90% of women who expect their husbands to be earning more than them, whilst at the same time they want women to be earning as much as men on average. Clearly you can't have it both ways. One way or another, women are going to be disappointed there somewhere along the line. If you want women to be earning as much as men, you need to encourage women not to be judging men by the size of their wallet. I'm going to let Tom speak now for a while because he raises lots of very good men's rights points. I'm going to link to his website as well because he's got sources for all of these claims on there. I haven't been over all of the sources myself yet, but I'm going to leave that to you guys.
Men paying more taxes and getting less back. That won't be the headline tonight though. Miss Andrews, 69% of factual media is negative on men. Women are 4 times more sexist in their attitudes. Not in what they say, I was mistaken about that. In their attitudes, women are 4 times more sexist than men. And sexism is portrayed as something that only men do. The lace curtain, men's issues kept out of the media. No forums. You, general students, have not read men's rights literature because there hasn't been any included in the curriculum, because it's being blocked. Chivalry, benevolent sexism, letting professional victim feminists get away with it. Suicide stats, 75% of suicides are of men. Homelessness we've covered. Disease, men die more of the top 14 of 15 causes. Feminist silence, life expectancy, brushed under the carpet all around the world. Domestic violence by women, 70% of domestic violence initiated by them. Conscription, Only men between the age of 18 and 45 can be legally enslaved. Crime and punishment, being male the #1 factor in getting a longer sentence for the same crime. Men who murder 20 times more likely to be executed for it than women who murder. Alimony, 26% of wives earn more than their husbands, but only 3% of wives, ex-wives, pay alimony to men. Retirement inequality all around the world. No mention of that from any feminist I can remember in living memory. The false rape epidemic covered. Feminist lies don't get discussed either, and that's what this is all about. That's why it's alien to so many of you. And many of you probably never heard of the men's rights movement. That needs to change, and feminism needs to stop making up monster stories about men's rights activists. But the truth is, as I finish up, Estelle here says that, you know, men's issues do exist. Well, the most sexist attitude of all is to say that men's issues do not exist. And unfortunately, the organisation that Estelle represents, although I will stress she wasn't part of this, but this is from a previous year, 2010, says men's issues don't exist. It also says that men groups should not be formed, and it also says that we shouldn't have men's officers in student unions. So whilst Estelle is behaving herself today, the truth is that behind the scenes, professional victim feminists are hell-bent on blocking men's issues, denying they exist, mocking. And we're talking about life and death issues up there. We're talking about life and death issues for men. And, you know, I'm not a homeless person, but it's about sympathizing and empathizing with people who are not you. So, I mean, it's all very well to talk the talk, but professional victim feminists have got to start including men's issues. No more excuses, no more claiming they do, when analysis shows they do not.
We're near the end now. This is going to be Estelle's concluding statement. I'm going to be doing a little bit of commentary over this because there's a lot more with her conclusion which I disagree with.
See people in the room who know me sort of smirk when so that I behave myself good and used. So I don't think that's ever been an accusation I need to. But just in terms of just kind of three things that have been mentioned there, I'm absolutely terrified of this constant talk of children's possessions. Like actually when we're talking men's rights, women's rights, let's not behave as if children from whatever relationship are somehow possessions of the parents, they're not, they're individual human beings.
Tom has not expressed that view, and if anything, I suspect that he's got a problem with the vast amounts of women who use their children as weapons against their ex-partners.
And just in terms, you mentioned taxes, about how you said men pay more and get less back. This isn't a feminist point, this is a socialist point. That's redistribution of wealth, and I think it's a pretty good thing.
I'm glad you acknowledge that it's a good point, but for you to say that's not a feminist issue, that's a socialist issue, is you just sidetracking the issue. If it was the other way round, if women were paying more tax than men and receiving back, you'd be saying it's absolutely a feminist issue. You've been doing this constantly throughout the debate. When legitimate men's rights points are raised, you brush it aside and say, oh, well, you know, that's economics, or that's a classism issue, that's nothing to do with gender. But when class issues and economic issues affect women, on the other hand, suddenly that is a feminist point. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
There's been a lot of discussion about the media and how the media presents men. So we look at how the media presents feminists. When was the last time, other than in self-professed feminists sort of leaning newspapers, of which there are probably about two, was there actually ever a positive representation of feminism? Like, the language of feminism has been absolutely co-opted by right-wing anti-feminists. and is used to actually damage women. The language of empowerment has been taken away from women and actually used to oppress them further.
Treatment of men is not equivalent to treatment of feminists. Feminists are members of an ideology which have a belief system which deserves no more immunity from criticism than any other belief structure. Men are a biological sex. The two are not equivalent there. And as for the right-wing anti-feminists who are co-opting your language in order to oppress you further, you don't cite any examples for that.
But actually at the heart of this, I think, is, and some of the points that people made about this not, in some ways, not really being a real debate, there's actually so many people in the room came with their minds made up, and it was great to hear you really say, actually, you know, you came here neutral and you wanted to know more. But it's this about how we understand issues. And actually, Tom, I think issues exist for men, but I don't believe they're men's issues. I don't think they exist for men simply because they are men as a group.
So there's men's issues, there just aren't men's issues.
I believe what we need to talk about are power structures, and in a society where one group of people holds the power, we have to speak in terms of the fact that actually the reason I don't think we should have men's officers is the same reason I don't think we should have white students officers, and we shouldn't have heterosexual students officers, we shouldn't have non-disabled students officers in our student unions, because what that is misunderstanding the fact that in a society that's dominated by those people, every single person who isn't specifically discussing an issue from the oppressed group is speaking on behalf of those people because that is the dominant viewpoint.
Okay, so firstly, in principle, I don't think there's anything wrong with a white group forming. In practice, however, they are inevitably racist organisations, but that should be confirmed before they're opposed. Now, the main point is that women are not a minority. There are more men in power, primarily due to different lifestyle choices, but women do make up the majority of the electorate and vote more than men do. So if a political party wants to vote against women's rights, they won't get voted in. I know you're a Marxist, so you might not understand this, but that's how a democracy works. You make it sound like government is just a bunch of rich old white guys sitting in a room going, how can we oppress women today? We have a Minister for Women's Inequalities. We don't have a Minister for Men Inequalities. If the patriarchy was designed to elevate men at the expense of women, then this is not what you'd expect to see. Now, whether biologically or socially, in general, men protect women and compete with other men. We don't have the same in-group preference that women have, urging us to elevate the status of our own group. It's a completely different issue to race, where it pretty much has been one-sided. Men and women have had their own gender roles which have had both positive and negative connotations, and there are issues for both sides. Finally then, let's for 1 second imagine that this is women's rights and this is men's rights. Now clearly I don't believe this, but I'm going to play by your rules and I'm going to imagine that this is probably what you think. Now, you want to do this, right, which will inevitably lead slightly in this. Now, I want to have this. You claim that that's what you want as well. And we all have our natural biases. So, yeah, this is women's rights, this is men's rights. So, if you completely ignore the points raised by the other side, how will you know when to stop? How will you know when you've got this and you haven't got this?
The dominant viewpoint is what we discussed at the time, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with having space to discuss the fact that people are oppressed. I don't understand, and it's an open challenge I leave to anyone in the room. Why does it offend you so much that I want to do something about the fact that society is structured in a way that it oppresses me? Why does that offend you so much? I'm not going to read your books, I don't want to give you any money, so give out good or leave them.
So she offers an open challenge to anyone in the room to change her mind, and then when something's presented which might change her mind, oh, I don't want to look at that. There's no evidence anywhere. Here's some evidence. La, la, la. Why is anyone taking these stupid cunts seriously? Anyway, that's it from me for now. Until next time, comment, rate, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.